towards 19 minutes after 6 o'clock in Trinidad and Tobago as we get going into our interviews this morning. Well, let's give you the context, please. 5 additional COVID-19 deaths and 158 new cases have been recorded as the country continues to be impacted by the deadly coronavirus. And I think it's on the basis of the worrying figures that Prime Minister Dr. Keith Rowley said that additional measures had to be taken. All non-essential retail and street vending have been prohibited. Essential outlets such as pharmacies and groceries, hardwares will remain open. And the limits of their opening hours are 6 a.m., the earliest. They can't be in operation earlier than 6 a.m. and they can't be in operation later than 8 p.m. So 6 a.m., 8 p.m. Those are the limits of the working hours. The restrictions are for a 3-week period up till May the 23rd, after which the government expects will yield the desired reduction in the COVID-19 cases. And it is so significant because we heard yesterday from the medical experts that at least 2 people have passed away, one in the 30s, one in the 40s, without any comorbidities. No comorbidities, and one in the 30s, one in the 40s. And that should be a salutary message to all of us that we are all at risk. This idea that there's only certain group, the age group and whatever and so on. One in the 30s, one in the 40s with no comorbidities passed away because of COVID-19. We don't know which particular strain. Dr. Rowley also announced a multi-million-dollar pandemic relief package to be extended by government. Again, there'll be a lot of skepticism as to how that will be rolled out. But let's get the view of some stakeholders. We're joined by Melissa Senhouse, President of the Greater Tunapuna Chamber of Industry and Commerce, Rajiv Dipti, President of the Supermarkets Association of Trinidad and Tobago, and Martin George, President of the Tobago Business Chamber. He's also a constitutional lawyer, formerly a member of the Police Service Commission as well, I should point out. Good morning to all. Thank you very much for joining us. If I could start with you, Ms. Senhouse. We haven't heard from you in quite some time, and we do appreciate you taking the time to join us this morning. As someone in the business community, someone who would have been impacted by the regulations, what is your perspective on these updated regulations? Good morning to you.
Good morning, Fazir. Good morning to the panelists and to your viewers. Fazir, well, I mean, the news that we received yesterday was very alarming. The government really painted a grave picture. And I mean, when you're hearing that within 10 days, quite possibly, if it is the path is not, if it is the spike is not arrested, that our healthcare system might become overwhelmed, it truly is very troubling. So I understand the need for it, but it can't be done in isolation then.
And when you say it can't be done in isolation, and I know from a business perspective, one of the repeated lamentations of the business community, especially the service sector, and I know that the nature of your business is a bit different, is that businesses, in the vast majority they maintain, have been following the protocols, have been ensuring that their staff are best prepared, that customers ensure that they follow the protocols. And there's a sense from the business community that they are being made to pay for the relaxed attitude of the general public or other elements of the community. Do you share that view?
Well, when chatting with the members, yes, we have the 2 extremes. We have where persons are in agreement and they're saying, okay, yes, this is what has to be done to arrest it. But then you do have the others that said, well, okay, I've done everything I had to do. Your example with the hairdressers, we taken one person at a time, we only taking appointments, one person at a time, we sanitizing. Of course, in the hairdresser, there's no need to really social distance because it's one person at a time. You have the other retail industries that are saying, well, yes, we are sanitizing, we are social distancing, we have all the protocols in place, but yet we are the ones that are targeted. So the question is asked, where's the information showing that it is the retail industry that is responsible really for this spike?
Very, very
And that's
valid
one of the
question.
questions that persons are asking.
Very, very valid question indeed. Let me go to Rajiv Dipti, because Mr. Dipti, your sector remains open. Supermarkets, obviously, essential supply of food and so on. Are your members ready to deal with this? Because you've been complaining about supermarkets almost becoming liming points now, because families are coming in droves and so on. Are you worried that supermarkets could actually be identified as sources of continuation of the spike?
Good morning, Fazir. Good morning, Trinidad and Tobago. I believe the news that the Prime Minister gave us yesterday was very alarming, as Mrs. Senhouse indicated. I think that based on the epidemiological feedback, that we are on the cusp of a threshold in terms of what they believe is the caseload becoming unmanageable, and it's a situation in which they feel that the parallel healthcare system could be overwhelmed. Now, despite the exhortations of the government, I think there's been some double standards, perhaps on their part, and it's really not the fault perhaps of one person. It's really a case of you need to lead by example. I heard you reference Tobago this morning, the Easter weekend, and I think that was one of them. But I was really heartened by Dr. Rowley's speech yesterday. I think he really set the tone, and he's prepared to draw a line in the sand for the next 3 weeks. Now, based on what he wants to do for the next 3 weeks and what he's hoping to strategically achieve, we are prepared to support that in a hard line. Now, we put out a notice in the last week pleading with families to send one member of the household to do the shopping. And this was based on the fact that when the lockdown did come back into effect, when they rolled back restrictions, is that we noticed a trend where gatherings were taking place in the supermarkets, and it became a recreational outing for some of the families. Now that we understand that the pandemic fatigue has set in a heavy way, Fazir. I really, my hearts go out to the people of Trinidad and Tobago. This people are just fed up of COVID-19, the protocols in place, the things that they have to do and go through. It's sickening to an extent. However, we are reminding people that behavioral protocols must be observed. And if we are, and I more than anything else, we take no pride in continuing to be an essential business. But if we as supermarkets don't open, where are people going to get their food? And this is something we continuously remind ourselves and our staff of, that we need to set an example for the wider public. We have to be very consistent in the way we continue to wear our masks, encourage social distancing, wash your hands, please, So we are trying our best to control the situations in the supermarkets. However, the etiquette from customers has been terribly poor, Fazir. We have been pleading with them. There have been very simple examples of people trying to cut lines, not observing social distancing, attacking our staff at times. So when they feel slighted, and it's been a case of that by John Public, and it's a case of frustration, it's a case of depression, it's a case of fatigue. It's a lot of factors coming into play here. So I think that the general population is just generally fed up, but we are doing our best on our side to do that. We've been told that we could continue to operate till 8 p.m. We will open the stores during the hours of operation and close our doors strictly by 8 p.m. The last customer will be out the door by that time, after which we will sanitize the stores, continue the cleaning standards that we've set strict about, and we will make arrangements, because obviously we have concerns where transportation capacity has now been cut in half. So we have to make arrangements for staff members where possible to get them home on time. We are prepared to work with our members and our staff on that, and to roster accordingly. So Fazir, that is the situation right now in a snapshot.
And before I go across to Martin George, if I could stay with you for just another response, Mr. Dipti. Would it be correct to say that some of your members have not been enforcing the regulations as strictly as they should? Because I understand the point that you're making. People might be fatigued about it and they might be fed up with all the restrictions, but restrictions are restrictions. And if someone is going to barge into a grocery and then they're not going to conduct themselves properly or dress properly or keep the distance, you have to get them out of the store. And can it be argued that some of your members, because of you don't want to create an issue, you don't want to create a situation in your business place, and of course there's revenue, that some of your members have not been as stringent as they should be in enforcing those protocols?
That's an extremely valid point, Fazir, which is why we took the novel step of partnering with the Trinidad and Tobago Police Service. They met with us last week, Wednesday, at their request because of the same concern that you raised. And based on that feedback, they have committed to working with us during this extended lockdown, because now it was really all about the month-end period. Now they have reached out to us and let us know, listen, we're going to be working with you throughout the lockdown period to see what can be done. However, I must reiterate that my membership has been responsible to an extent. Remember, Fazir, we put policies out there. We ask customers to respect them. And there's a certain level of etiquette not being observed by general public. There've been in some cases, my staff members have reported abuse by the public, and it's a very, very loaded situation. Sometimes it's better to not say anything to a customer who will rant and rave and perhaps get violent with you or want to take some kind of action against you. So it's really a case of managing personal situations and peculiar situations where circumstances arise in the interest of the overall operation. And I hear your point loud and clear, but people in this country need to understand the restrictions are there in place. Let's follow them very strictly for the next 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever it is, and let's see the light at the end of the tunnel, that we could exit this pain and suffering that the Prime Minister has referenced. If he says that this is the bitter medicine we need to take now to get out of this, then let's swallow the pill and let's move on.
Martin George, you've advocated the Tobago bubble. No indication of that as yet. Do you think that these tightened restrictions are going to work?
Well, the thing is, the restrictions have been increased for a purpose. And of course, the government is seeking to have an immediate effect in terms of the reduction in number of cases. So the thing is, what we've had thus far from the government is basically, when one considers, like, for instance, the carrot and stick approach, all that Trinidad and Tobago has gotten basically is the stick. We've not gotten, from a business perspective, the carrot. And we've always advocated that you need to balance things. You need to manage it in a way that you strike that fine line between your restrictive measures and your measures which facilitate the continuance and growth of business. We of the Tobago Business Chamber, and myself personally, we have advocated certain solutions. Of course, it's up to the government to decide what they will, go with or what they will not go with. But you see, firstly, I like to be guided by the statistics. And if we look at it currently, the leader in the terms of the number of COVID-19 cases is the United States, with 32.5 million cases. The leader in terms of deaths is also the United States, with 577,000 deaths, so more than 500,000 deaths in the United States from the COVID-19. But yet, the reports recently have shown that the US economy has grown by 6.7% in the first quarter of 2021. So in other words, in the first 3 months of 2021, with all that is happening, their economy has grown. And part of that has been attributable to the very aggressive vaccination campaign which President Biden rolled out immediately upon assuming office. You recall his initial goal when he said he wanted 100 million vaccinations to be delivered. Then he was able to actually increase that within the first 100 days to reach a target of 150 million persons vaccinated. So the point is, for you, we have to understand, and we accept as a business community, we accept, look, yes, there has to be the restriction. But the point is, we are saying, don't just give restrictions. Our position is, along with restrictions, let's have vaccinations.
But if you'd allow me, Mr.
restrictions
George,
without
if you'd allow me just to come in, the Prime Minister has made it clear, even if let's say they won't acknowledge that they were slow in responding to the options from India or whatever, let's say that, which they won't accept, of course. But the point is that he has stated quite definitively, stated it on Thursday, there are no vaccines to be accessed right now, none anywhere in the world. There are none, and
that is not accurate, with the greatest of respect. I mean, of course, I didn't hear the Prime Minister, and I'm not at all attempting to disagree with him. But I'll tell you, look, and I mean, it's good that you mentioned India, because remember, when the crisis in India hit international news, immediately they made an appeal, and the US, which had the largest stockpile of AstraZeneca vaccines, immediately made hundreds of thousands of doses available to India. So if you understand me, it's not a question of it not being available. The fact is, we have to, if it is that we have to swallow our pride, and I mean, as I have said before, if we have to beg, then let's beg. At the end of the day, we cannot have our people there suffering without the vaccinations, and we just saying, well, okay, we can't get the vaccines, or, we're not going to beg for vaccines. If that's what is necessary, then let's do it. If it means that you have to partner with the business community, because I think that's where certainly I would say the government has really dropped the ball. And, you saw in situations with Answer McCall, then there was a back and forth with Answer McCall as to who said what. And, you ought not to be engaging in these shenanigans with persons whom you can actually be partnering with to get the vaccinations here in Trinidad and Tobago. There was a back and forth with the government and the High Commissioner from India, then there's a back and forth between the government and the US ambassador. And the point is, while we are wasting time in all these, personal, struggles and, personal conflicts, we ought to have been harnessing our forces, our resources, even those in the business community who have the resources, otherwise who could say, well, look, yes, we can assist, we have contacts, we can, help, and you ensure that you get the vaccinations. You can't have restrictions and no vaccinations, and I mean, the point is, if you look at the situation for you, in the US, New York is preparing to reopen big time. California is reopening. Florida is open for business like nothing. Of course, DeSantis is, he's a character by himself. But the point is, when you look at it, the economy is flourishing in a way that is unprecedented in a time of crisis. Real estate prices, if you look at the reports, real estate prices in the US are through the roof. Luxury vehicles are selling, they're flying off the shelves. People paying above sticker price for luxury vehicles because you cannot get enough supply. So in other words, while we understand, and we've always said this, and this has always been our position from day one, we understand the need for the restrictions, but it can't just be restrictions, restrictions, restrictions. We are saying no restrictions without vaccination. So in other words, let us hear your plans for the vaccination. Of course, we have to comply with the restrictions, but the point is, at this stage, all we're getting is the stick and no carrot.
All right, let's go back to Ms. Senthouse. We're going to take a break in a short while, but we'll continue our discussion up to the top of the hour, I believe, because we wanted to get some more from you all in relation to this. Ms. Senthouse, I recall the last time we spoke at length about this and the issues with the banks and so on, and that has been a continuing lament from the business community. But in relation to the carrot, if you could just take a line from what Mr. George is talking about, that what would be an encouragement to you and your members that look, it's not just about lockdown, and maybe going to financial ruin. What would be some sign to you that would suggest that, look, here's an incentive for the business community to step it up, to do what is required, to therefore be able to open your businesses, engage in activity, stay in business, and indeed not present a risk as far as the spread of COVID-19? Ms. Senthouse?
One of the things that, One of the things that would act as a carrot would be for us to go back to where we were in 2020, when the banks were willing to provide some form of assistance whereby they allow deferral of loan payments. So that would be definitely something that would assist the businesses with respect to their cash flow. One of the other things that we would ask of the government to be that carrot would be the waiving of any penalties and interest associated with late payments. We already know that the government currently, the staff is working on 25% rotation. So it's expected that, certain things within the government will take longer to process. What is disheartening is with that lengthier period of time that we have to wait, you go into different institutions to, let's say, make a payment, and you're unable to do so. So I would give you an example of one of our members when they expressed frustration, where the Tunapuna district office, it's supposed to close at 12 o'clock. They went on Friday to make their payment for the tax, and they arrived at 10:15, and and they were closed. They were not allowing anybody else to go inside. And then lo and behold, on Monday, they would arrive, they reached early, and they were charged penalty and interest.
Mm-hmm. And when you're faced with a situation like that, I mean, because there appears to be no flexibility on that side, how difficult is the situation for your members in that regard? Because there's almost, and the prevailing view about business people. They have plenty of money. They just like to pretend that they're poor, and they catch in the tail. They're always crying, but really they have the money hide up there, and they don't want to give it out to their workers and so on. But when you're faced with situations like that, how much more difficult is it? How much more challenging is it for the business community?
Exceptionally so, because at the end of the day, cash is king, right? So you have to be able to manage your cash flow. Something like that you will not have anticipated, right? I mean, we understand that we are in a pandemic and that we may have reduced income. But to have that income reduced to zero and then now have to find additional money for you to pay penalties and interest, it's very discouraging. And the thing about it is that the government, being a stakeholder in businesses, how they could view this is, I understand they may say that waiving the penalty and the interest will be reduced revenue for them. However, it could be looked a little differently. It could be looked as they are making an investment into the business to ensure that the business has the opportunity to survive and to continue to pay taxes in the long run.
It's a good way of looking at it as we go to the break now. 6:41 in Trinidad and Tobago. We'll continue our dialogue with our three guests from various elements of the business community in Trinidad and Tobago. And as we go to that break, let's remind you of the COVID-19 protocols. Please wear the mask properly over the nose and mouth. It is the law. Keep your distance from others, at least 6 feet or 2 meters. Stay home if you're ill. Wash your hands often with soap and water, or use an alcohol-based hand sanitizer. Cough into a tissue or into the crook of your elbow. Avoid touching your face, and sanitize, of course, those hard surfaces, phones, tabletops, handrails, doorknobs and trolleys as often as possible. We'll be right back with our three guests.
You gotta be careful. You gotta be careful, careful.
6:44 in Trinidad and Tobago. We certainly urge you to be careful, everybody, with the tightened restrictions. We have the Brazilian variant here with us. The authorities, the medical authorities, have made it quite clear. Whether we're interested in the politicians or not, listen to the facts, listen to the science. The numbers are going upwards. And even if you were to stop now with all of and introduce all the restrictions now, the numbers are not going to tail off immediately. So we are in this for a while, at least for the next couple of weeks or 3 weeks. Let's follow the rules, let's follow the protocols, and let's continue our discussion with our three guests. Rajiv Dipti, President of the Supermarkets Association of Trinidad and Tobago; Martin George, President of the Tobago Business Chamber. He's also a constitutional lawyer. It'll be interesting to hear his perspective on this whole issue of police access into private places and private homes and so on. And we also have with us Melissa Senhouse, President of the Greater Tunapuna Chamber of Industry and Commerce. Rajiv Dipti, this issue about the challenge of controlling unruly or just members of the public who are just ignoring the protocols and the regulations. You talked about the collaboration with the police. Are you ready for police to come into your members' premises to take people out?
The reality is that according to the regulations, there are various statutory bodies, including the police service, who, if we are found in contravention of the regulations, there are consequences there. There are also consequences from other statutory bodies, including public health, OSHA. So we are always having to be on our P's and Q's. And one of the reasons we're making such a big effort to manage the crowds is because we don't want to run afoul of the regulations and run afoul of being shut down. So we are doing our best to create sensitization, awareness, and compliance from the wider public. And it starts with our own staff in stores. And we aren't perfect for zero. We still see delinquency from our own people inside the stores. So we really start with them first and seek the compliance from John Public. Now, these restrictions have put us in a position where we will see increased volumes of traffic inside the stores. The non-essential retail sector has been shut down, so people will have to come to the supermarkets. And I just want to linger on that for a moment, because the reality is that with these businesses shut down, yes, there's pain and suffering going around. And I do believe, I heard the Prime Minister talk yesterday about the funds to be dispersed for the social support relief systems, and those logistics to be worked out. Now, I assume that we will be drawing further down on the Heritage and Stabilization Fund to work on these social supports. I would have heard from Mrs. Senhouse that some waivers that they are seeking for the wider business community. I do believe this is something that could be explored. Right now, as we have many vulnerable, and we do want to see more of those businesses disappear completely from the middle class and sink and fall. Where it's a situation where, as she so rightly put, cash flow is king. And when that dries up, the ability to turn around your situation really is out of your reach. And I understand that as much as we're trying to control the spread of this virus, we have to put contingencies in place for the preservation of business after this. So this is something that I really truly support, and I would like to see more done from that perspective, because we have to be so careful with all strata of society, because there are people passing from the middle class into the lower strata, and you know, it's really a question of who will sink and how fast they are sinking in quicksand, because that's what this situation has done. COVID is quicksand in so many ways.
Indeed, and some have been talking about the vanishing middle class in many respects, even before the arrival of COVID-19. But let's talk with Martin George, with his legal experience. To Mr. George, I kind of rubbing my head. I could do some lime call right now, as far as understanding who is right and who is wrong in relation to this issue about police access into people's premises if there's a suspicion that there's a violation of the COVID-19 regulations that could put people at risk, that could put the wider community at risk. I mean, I know how the law is, it's long-winded and detailed and so on, but as best as you can, is the government right in its position, or are they wrong in their position?
All right, for the reality is that it's not as easy as that. And that, unfortunately, is the beauty of the law. And at one and the same time, that's also the ugliness of the law, in that, it's never always cut and dried or black and white. In fact, for our firm is currently working on a legal paper, which we shall put out by today for the public to share our thoughts and views. So it's not something that I can just give a yes or no answer to in that regard. But as I say, today we will explore the issues in detail to try to share some enlightenment for the public.
And we look forward to that coming out. But do you appreciate the public confusion about this, which invariably comes down the lines
of particularly when you have major stakeholders coming out and trotting out, conflicting views, and each one is standing on their soapbox and, pounding their chest and, saying, well, this is what I am saying it is. And then you have somebody else coming out and saying something different. I mean, of course. And then, of course, when you add to that mix any element of either race or class or, social strata bias or discrimination in terms of how the law is enforced and applied, then of course everybody is going to be suspicious of, when you come out and say, well, look, I am enforcing it. We've seen many examples of that. You've seen where you have a dance hall party or a Zessa party. You see everybody lined up on the pavement, lying down, face down, and stuff like that. But then you see in other situations, it appears that people are treated with kid gloves, and with a velvet rose. So therefore, obviously, the public is going to be suspicious in those circumstances.
But are you even wary, Mr. George?
I think the government ought to have addressed more frontally by direct legislation that specifically deals with this scenario, rather than relying on the provisions of the 1940 Public Health Ordinance, which, of course, we all know that those provisions empowered persons to enter your premises. All of us knew as children growing up, you'd see the public health inspector coming around in your area, and they will say, yes, they'll show you their card and stuff like that. They say they're coming into your premises. They see if you have canisters with water, breeding mosquitoes, that kind of thing. And of course, they were allowed to enter because they do have that right. And so it's still that 1940 regulation that the government is relying on from that public health ordinance. And I thought that they could have been a bit more proactive and creative, because even in such a circumstance of our conflicted, political system, whereby the opposition sometimes feels that, well, look, they must oppose for opposing sake, I don't think our opposition would have been, obstructive to the point of trying to frustrate any legislation that would have brought clarity to that situation. So I thought that it was something that, in the circumstances, maybe, an act of parliament ought to have been implemented, rather than you simply go in with the public health ordinance, and the broad but yet still unspecified powers of entry into private premises which are contained therein.
Well, we look forward to that release coming out later today, and I'm sure there's going to be lots of discussion. Well, Mr. Naus, Mr. George alluded to the legislation of the 1940s. It feels like the 1940s, if you have to be standing outside a business place for them to be closed at 10:15, in an era when online transactions should be the norm. I mean, and just yesterday I read the unedifying commentary from the Trade and Industry Ministry, or whatever they call themselves, saying that people should exercise their online e-commerce options, which are in no way relevant to people engaged in the service industry. But Mr. Naus, do you get any sort of traction from, whether it's the bankers, whether you have any influence on anyone, member of parliament, local government representative, a lawyer, and so on, when these issues are brought up? Why is it in 2021 you can't pay the taxes and whatever else it is online? Just quickly to get your view on that before we wrap up.
Well, for you, actually you can, but your tax have to be more than $100,000.
So what's the point? Listen, what's the point? I mean, so why? Why is that? Why is that caveat put in place? So if I have to pay $99,999.99, I don't walk in the place with the money?
Yes, pretty much. I would really like to see that adjust, because it would truly make our lives easier. especially when you're talking about when you go into the lines, you have to do the same congregation that persons would like us to refrain from.
And when you're dealing with an overall situation like that, this is as a final thought, Ms. Senhouse, before we wrap up, and you want to thank our other guests for taking the time. How many of your members are already at the brink or have already basically said, look, you know, there's no coming back from this? Is it that bad for some of your members?
Yes, some members closed up since last year. One of the restaurants, one of our members who own a number of restaurants, he indicated that he would be closing a branch. He was planning to close it at the end of May, and he moved that up.
So it's definitely a difficult time indeed, Ms. Senhouse. We want to thank you very much indeed for taking the time. Rajiv Dipti of the Supermarkets Association and Martin George, President of the Tobago Business Chamber. And as he said, his firm, they expected to issue a statement later today offering their perspective on this entire issue about the possibility of police officers entering your premises, and again, all in relation to an interpretation of that 90s 40 legislation 80-something years ago. Here we are in 2021, where if you're paying less than $100,000, according to what we heard from Ms. Senhouse, you have to go in person with cash, with a check, or whatever, in a time of COVID-19. Imagine that. In 2021, and we are reminded by some corporate communication, something from the ministry with clearly nothing to do over the weekend, that because with your service industries business is suffering, you could take it online. I want to see them do somebody here online. Let's take a look at this sunset image captured by a viewer, and it's a very nice image indeed. And now a video of some rain clouds approaching sent by another viewer. There are quite a few rain clouds around over the last 3 or 4 days. Ominous looking or pleasant looking, because some people enjoy it when it's raining. There's a comforting feeling unless you have flooding issues. We have the news coming up at the top of the hour.